The bitter wind howled across the Wyoming plains as Rylan Faulkner pulled his coat tighter around his broad shoulders, squinting through the fast-approaching blizzard. The 28-year-old cowboy had been riding the fence line of the Diamond F Ranch when the storm hit, faster and more vicious than anyone had predicted. His horse, Thunder, trudged through the deepening snow, head lowered against the icy onslaught. "Just a bit further, boy," Rylan muttered, his words immediately swallowed by the howling wind. The abandoned line shack that stood near the northern boundary of the ranch was their only hope for shelter now. The small structure had been used years ago when the ranch hands needed a place to stay during roundup, but it had fallen into disuse as the ranch operations changed. Still, it would provide walls and a roof, which was more than they had out in the open. The year was 1879, and winter in Wyoming territory was unforgiving. Rylan had been working for the Diamond F for 5 years now, ever since he'd ridden in from Texas looking for work. He'd proven himself a capable cowhand, and the owner, Samuel Donovan, had promoted him to foreman the previous spring. The shack finally came into view, a dark silhouette against the whiteness of the storm. Rylan dismounted with stiff limbs, his fingers nearly numb as he led Thunder to the lean-to attached to the side of the structure. It wasn't much, but it would keep the horse out of the worst of the weather. "Stay here, boy," he said, patting the horse's neck before securing him. He grabbed his saddlebags and pushed through the deepening snow to the door of the shack. It took several hard shoves with his shoulder before the warped wood gave way, scraping across the dirt floor. Rylan stepped inside, grateful to be out of the wind, though the temperature inside the shack was barely warmer than outside. He reached for the matches in his pocket, intending to light the lantern he knew was kept on the shelf by the door. As the match flared to life, illuminating the small interior, Rylan froze. He wasn't alone. Huddled in the corner, partially covered by what looked like a tattered blanket, was the form of a woman. For one terrible moment he thought she might be dead, but then he caught the slight movement of her chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. "Madam," he called out, approaching cautiously. When she didn't respond, he knelt beside her. Her face was pale, her lips tinged with blue. Ice crystals had formed in her dark blonde hair. She was young, perhaps in her early 20s, dressed in clothes that were wholly inadequate for the Wyoming winter. Without hesitation, Rylan moved into action. The line shack had a small stove in the corner, and he prayed there might still be some firewood stacked nearby. First, though, he needed to see to the woman. He set his lantern down and gathered her in his arms. She was light, too light, and she didn't stir as he moved her closer to the stove. Her skin was ice-cold to the touch, and Rylan knew she was in the dangerous stages of hypothermia. "Stay with me, madam," he murmured as he laid her down on his bedroll. He quickly checked the small wood box beside the stove and found it half full of old, but dry logs a small blessing. Within minutes, he had a fire started in the stove, the first flames licking at the wood. The woman still hadn't moved. Rylan knew from experience that she needed warmth and fast. He recalled the stories old Benson, the ranch cook, had told about men lost in blizzards. Body heat was the quickest way to warm someone who was half frozen. Rylan hesitated only briefly before making his decision. He removed his coat and then gently wrapped the woman more securely in his bedroll. He added his own blanket from his saddlebags, then lay down beside her, pulling her close to share his warmth. "I apologize for the impropriety, madam," he said softly, though she showed no signs of hearing him. "But I aim to keep you alive." As the fire in the stove began to warm the small space, Rylan studied the woman's face. She was beautiful, with delicate features and long eyelashes that rested against her pale cheeks. Who was she, and what was she doing out here alone in a blizzard? The nearest town, Clearwater, was 15 miles away, and there were no other ranches for miles around. The hours passed slowly. Outside, the wind continued to howl, but inside, the temperature gradually rose. Rylan periodically rose to add more wood to the fire, then returned to the woman's side. Eventually, he felt her begin to shiver, a good sign, according to Benson's tales. Her body was trying to warm itself. "That's it," he encouraged, rubbing her arms gently through the blankets. "Come back now." It was nearing midnight when her eyelids finally fluttered open. For a moment, she stared at the rough-hewn ceiling of the shack, confusion evident in her expression. Then her gaze shifted to Rylan, and he found himself looking into the most striking blue eyes he'd ever seen. "Where?" Her voice was barely a whisper, cracked and dry. "You're safe," Rylan said quickly, reaching for his canteen. "You're in a line shack on the Diamond F Ranch. I found you half frozen. Here, can you drink a little?" He supported her head as she took a small sip of water. She coughed weakly but managed to swallow. "Thank you," she murmured, her eyes already closing again. "So cold." "I know, the fire's going and I'll keep it that way. You rest now." She didn't need the encouragement, already slipping back into unconsciousness, but her breathing seemed stronger now, more regular. Rylan settled back down beside her, determined to keep watch through the night. Morning came with a strange stillness. The blizzard had passed, leaving behind a world transformed by snow. Rylan had maintained the fire through the night, dozing occasionally but never deeply. His charge had slept fitfully, sometimes mumbling words he couldn't understand, but her color had improved, and the blue tinge had left her lips. He was adding more wood to the stove when he heard her stir. Turning, he found her watching him, those blue eyes now alert and wary. "Good morning," he said, keeping his voice gentle. "How are you feeling?" She pushed herself up to a sitting position, wincing slightly. "Better, I think, though everything aches." Her voice was low and pleasant, with an accent he couldn't quite place. "You saved my life." Rylan shrugged, suddenly self-conscious. Anyone would have done the same. But it wasn't anyone, it was you. She pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "My name is Frankie Blackburn. Most people call me Frankie. Rylan Faulkner, foreman at the Diamond F." He moved back to her side, offering his canteen again. "If you don't mind my asking, Miss Blackburn, what were you doing out in that storm? This isn't exactly a well-traveled area." Frankie took a long drink before answering. Her hands trembled slightly as she handed the canteen back. "I was on the stage coach to Clearwater. We were caught in the storm and the driver insisted on continuing. The stage overturned about 2 miles back, I think." Her eyes clouded with the memory. "The driver and the other passenger, an older gentleman, they didn't survive the crash. I tried to stay with the stage, but the horses had broken free, and I was afraid I'd freeze to death if I didn't find shelter." Rylan frowned. A stagecoach accident was serious business. "You walked 2 miles in that blizzard," she nodded, a hint of pride crossing her features. "I grew up in Montana. I know what winter can do if you don't keep moving." "Montana explains a lot," Rylan said with a small smile. "You're tougher than you look, Miss Blackburn." "Frankie, please." She attempted to smile back, but it faltered. "I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't found me." "Well, you don't have to worry about that now." Rylan stood and moved to his saddlebags. "I've got some jerky and hardtack. Not much of a breakfast, but it'll help get your strength back." They ate in companionable silence. Outside, the sun reflected brilliantly off the new snow, sending shafts of light through the small, grimy window of the shack. Rylan could see that Frankie was still weak, her movements slow and deliberate, but the worst danger had passed. "So, what brings you to Clearwater?" he asked eventually, curiosity getting the better of him. Frankie hesitated, something guarded entering her expression. "I have family there. Or at least I hope I do. My mother's sister moved to Clearwater years ago. I've never met her, but I have her address. After my mother passed away last month, I had nowhere else to go." "I'm sorry about your mother," Rylan said sincerely. Frankie nodded, accepting his condolence with quiet dignity. "She was sick for a long time. It wasn't unexpected." She looked around the small shack. "How far are we from Clearwater?" "About 15 miles as the crow flies. But with the snow this deep, it'll be slow going." Rylan glanced outside again. "We should wait another day, let you regain your strength." "But won't people be looking for you?" "Mr. Donovan knows I can take care of myself. Besides, he'd have my hide if I left a lady in distress." Rylan smiled reassuringly. "The ranch hands will assume I holed up somewhere to wait out the storm, which is exactly what I did." Frankie seemed to relax a little at his words. "I'm grateful for your help, Mr. Faulkner." "Rylan," he corrected. "If I'm calling you Frankie seems only fair." She smiled, and this time it reached her eyes, transforming her face. Rylan felt something stir in his chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire in the stove. "Rylan it is," she agreed. They spent the day in the small shack, Rylan venturing out only to check on Thunder and to gather more firewood from the small pile stacked against the outside wall. Frankie slept intermittently, her body still recovering from the ordeal. When she was awake, they talked. Rylan learned that she was 23, the only child of a widowed mother who had run a small boarding house in Butte, Montana. Her father had died in a mining accident when she was just a child. After her mother's death, the boarding house had been sold to pay off debts, leaving Frankie with barely enough money for the stagecoach ticket to Clearwater and a small trunk of belongings, which is now somewhere under the snow, along with everything I own in this world, she said with a sigh. "We can send someone to recover the stage and your things once we get to town," Rylan assured her. "And we should notify the authorities about the accident." Frankie nodded, her eyes troubled. "Those poor men. I tried to help them, but—" She trailed off, shaking her head. "You did what you could," Rylan said gently. "And you survived, which is no small feat." He told her about his own life, how he'd left his family's struggling farm in Tennessee at 18 to seek his fortune further west. He'd worked on ranches in Texas and Colorado before finding his place at the Diamond F 5 years earlier. "I've been saving to buy my own spread someday," he admitted. "Nothing fancy, just enough land for a decent herd and a small house." "That sounds wonderful," Frankie said, and there was genuine warmth in her voice. "A place of your own. That's all anyone can really ask for, isn't it?" As evening approached, Rylan fixed them a simple meal from his provisions. The storm had left the world outside brilliantly white and eerily quiet. "We'll head to Clearwater tomorrow," Rylan decided, looking out at the fading light. "Thunder can carry us both, though we'll have to go slow." Frankie nodded, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. "And if my aunt isn't there, or doesn't want me?" The vulnerability in her voice tugged at something deep inside Rylan. "Then we'll figure something else out. I won't leave you stranded, Frankie. I promise you that." She held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded, seemingly satisfied with what she saw in his eyes. "Thank you." That night, they slept side by side again, though Frankie was now strong enough to protest that he should take his bedroll back. Rylan insisted she keep it, making do with his saddle as a pillow and his coat for warmth. The fire kept the small space comfortable enough, and despite the hard floor, he found himself drifting off to sleep with a strange contentment. He was awakened in the pre-dawn hours by the sound of Frankie's voice, distressed and frightened. She was still asleep, caught in the grip of a nightmare, her hands clutching at the blanket. "No, please," she murmured. "Don't leave me here, please." Rylan moved to her side, gently touching her shoulder. "Frankie, wake up. You're dreaming." Her eyes flew open, wide and disoriented. For a moment she stared at him without recognition, then awareness returned. "Rylan," she whispered, relief flooding her features. "I dreamed I was back in the snow, alone, and I couldn't find shelter." "You're safe," he assured her, his hand still on her shoulder. "You're not alone." She reached up and covered his hand with her own. "Thank you for finding me." Their eyes met in the dim light of the dying fire, and something passed between them, a connection that transcended their brief acquaintance. Rylan felt his heart quicken, and for a moment he thought he might lean down and kiss her. The impulse shocked him with its intensity. Instead, he squeezed her shoulder gently and moved back. "Try to get some more sleep. We have a long ride ahead of us tomorrow." Frankie nodded, but her eyes lingered on his face for a moment before she turned away. Rylan returned to his makeshift bed, but sleep eluded him for a long time after that. Morning dawned clear and cold. Rylan rose early, rekindled the fire, and went out to check on Thunder. The snow was deep, but had developed a crust overnight that would support their weight in most places. The journey to Clearwater would be slow but manageable. When he returned to the shack, Frankie was awake and had neatly folded his bedroll. She looked better than she had the day before, though still pale. She had arranged her hair as best she could without a brush and washed her face with melted snow water. "Good morning," she greeted him with a smile that made his heart skip a beat. "Morning," he replied, stamping the snow from his boots. "Ready to head to Clearwater today?" She nodded, though Rylan thought he detected a hint of reluctance. "As ready as I'll ever be." They ate a quick breakfast of the last of his provisions, then prepared to leave. Rylan doused the fire and made sure everything in the shack was as they had found it. He helped Frankie mount Thunder, then swung up behind her. She was tense at first, sitting rigidly in front of him, but as they started their slow journey, she gradually relaxed. The world around them was transformed by snow, the familiar landscape now a series of smooth white hills and valleys. The sky was a clear, brilliant blue, the kind that only seems to exist in winter. Despite the cold, there was a beauty to it that couldn't be denied. "It's magnificent, isn't it?" Frankie said, echoing his thoughts. "So peaceful." "That it is," Rylan agreed, guiding Thunder carefully around a particularly deep drift. "Though I prefer it when I'm not worried about freezing to death." Frankie laughed, the sound bright in the still air. "Fair point." They rode in companionable silence for a while, Thunder picking his way carefully through the snow. Rylan was acutely aware of Frankie's closeness, the warmth of her back against his chest, the faint scent of her hair. It was both comfortable and unsettling, this sudden intimacy with a woman he barely knew. "Tell me about Clearwater," Frankie said eventually. "What kind of place is it?" "It's a decent town. Smaller than Butte, I'd imagine. Got a general store, a church, a schoolhouse. The usual establishments." Rylan paused, considering. "It's a friendly place for the most part. People look out for each other." "That sounds nice," Frankie said softly. "My mother always said that's what matters most in a community, people who care." "Your mother sounds like a wise woman." "She was." Frankie's voice held a note of sadness. "She always wanted me to find a place where I truly belonged. I'm not sure such a place exists, but I promised her I'd try." Rylan thought about that for a moment. "I think belonging isn't so much about the place as it is about the people you find there." Frankie turned slightly, looking up at him with those striking blue eyes. "That's a lovely thought, Rylan." Their gazes held for a moment too long before Rylan looked away, focusing on the path ahead. They continued their journey, stopping occasionally to rest thunder and to stretch their legs. By midday, they could see the smoke from Clearwater's chimneys in the distance. As they approached the outskirts of town, Frankie grew tense again. "I don't even know if Aunt Meredith will remember me. Mother wrote to her when I was born, but I'm not sure they stayed in touch after that." "Family is family," Rylan said reassuringly. "And if it doesn't work out, like I said, we'll figure something else out." The streets of Clearwater were partially cleared, with paths shoveled between buildings. People glanced curiously at them as they rode down the main street, Thunder's hooves crunching in the packed snow. "You know where your aunt lives?" Rylan asked. Frankie nodded. "Cedar Street. Mother had the address, number 18. They found Cedar Street easily enough." It was one of the nicer residential areas in Clearwater, with well-maintained houses set back from the road. Number 18 was a tidy 2-story home with green shutters and smoke curling from the chimney. Rylan helped Frankie dismount in front of the house, steadying her when her legs wobbled after the long ride. "Are you all right?" She nodded, though her face was pale and her eyes were fixed on the house. "Just nervous, I suppose. Would you like me to come with you to the door?" Frankie hesitated, then nodded gratefully. "If you wouldn't mind." Rylan secured Thunder to the hitching post, then offered Frankie his arm. Together, they walked up the shoveled path to the front door. Frankie took a deep breath, then knocked. They waited, and after a moment, the door opened to reveal a woman in her late 50s. She had the same blonde hair as Frankie, though liberally streaked with gray, and there was something in the set of her features that suggested a familial resemblance. "Yes?" the woman asked, her eyes moving curiously between them. "Mrs. Meredith Blackburn?" Frankie asked, her voice wavering slightly. "Yes, that's me. My name is Francisca Blackburn. I'm Elizabeth's daughter, your niece." The woman's eyes widened in shock, her hand moving to her throat. "Elizabeth's daughter? Little Francisca," Frankie nodded, a tentative smile forming. "Mother passed away last month, and I didn't know where else to go." For a terrible moment, Rylan thought Meredith might close the door in their faces. But then the older woman's expression softened and she stepped forward, opening her arms. "Oh, my dear girl, Elizabeth wrote to me of her illness. I had no idea." She embraced Frankie tightly, then pulled back to look at her. "You have her eyes, you know. Come in out of the cold." "Both of you," she added, glancing at Rylan. They were ushered into a warm parlor where a fire crackled in the grate. A man about Meredith's age rose from an armchair, looking at them with curiosity. "Thomas, this is my niece Francisca, Elizabeth's daughter," Meredith explained quickly. "And Rylan Faulkner, madam," Rylan supplied, removing his hat. "I found Miss Blackburn in a line shack during the blizzard. There was a stagecoach accident about 2 miles east of the Diamond F Ranch." "An accident?" Meredith exclaimed, guiding Frankie to a seat on the sofa. "My dear, are you hurt?" Frankie shook her head. "Just some bruises. The driver and the other passenger weren't so fortunate. If Rylan hadn't found me, I wouldn't have survived either." Thomas looked at Rylan with new respect. "We owe you a debt of gratitude, Mr. Faulkner. Please sit down." "You must be exhausted after your journey." Rylan hesitated. Now that Frankie was safely with her family, his duty was technically fulfilled, but something made him reluctant to leave just yet. "I should report the accident to Sheriff Miller first," he said, "and I need to see to my horse." "Of course," Thomas nodded, "but please return afterward for a proper meal. It's the least we can do." Rylan looked at Frankie, who was watching him with a mixture of gratitude and something else he couldn't quite identify. "I'll be back soon," he promised. She nodded, and he thought he saw relief in her eyes. "Thank you, Rylan, for everything." The report to Sheriff Miller was straightforward enough. The sheriff promised to send men out to the site of the accident as soon as possible to recover the bodies and any belongings. Rylan described as best he could where the stage had overturned based on Frankie's description. "Lucky you found the lady," Miller commented. "Not many could survive a night in the open in that kind of weather." "She made it to the line shack on her own," Rylan pointed out. "She's tougher than she looks." The sheriff nodded, making a few final notes. "Well, Mr. Faulkner, I appreciate you bringing this to my attention promptly. I'll notify the stage company. They'll want to talk to Miss Blackburn when she's recovered a bit more." After leaving the sheriff's office, Rylan took Thunder to the livery stable, where he arranged for the horse to be fed, watered, and given a good rub-down. He then sent a message to the Diamond F, letting Mr. Donovan know that he was in town and would return to the ranch the following day. With his duties discharged, Rylan returned to the Blackburn house. He was greeted warmly by Thomas and shown to a guest room where he could wash up before dinner. The house was comfortable and well appointed, suggesting that the Blackburns were relatively prosperous. When Rylan came downstairs, he found Frankie in the parlor, now dressed in a borrowed dress that was slightly too large for her frame. Her hair was neatly arranged, and there was more color in her cheeks. She smiled when she saw him, and that strange warmth spread through his chest again. "You clean up nicely, Cowboy," she teased gently. Rylan ran a self-conscious hand over his freshly washed face. "I do my best, madam." Meredith bustled in from the kitchen. "Dinner is nearly ready. Thomas is just opening a bottle of wine. It's not every day we have cause for such celebration." "Celebration?" Rylan questioned. "Finding family you didn't know you had," Meredith explained, her eyes bright with unshed tears as she looked at Frankie. "And meeting the man who saved her life. Those are things worth celebrating, Mr. Faulkner." Dinner was a pleasant affair. The food was excellent: roasted chicken, potatoes, and fresh bread, a welcome change from the trail rations of the past 2 days. Thomas, Rylan learned, was a successful merchant who owned the general store in Clearwater. He and Meredith had been married for 30 years but had no children of their own. "Which makes your arrival all the more special, my dear," Meredith told Frankie, reaching across the table to squeeze her hand. "I've always regretted losing touch with Elizabeth after your father died. She was so devastated and I was so far away." "Mother never blamed you," Frankie assured her. "She spoke of you fondly. She would be happy to know I found you." Throughout the meal, Rylan found his gaze continually drawn to Frankie. She seemed to be blossoming in the warm, welcoming atmosphere of her relative's home. She laughed more readily, and there was a lightness to her that hadn't been present before. It suited her, this happiness, and Rylan was glad to see it. After dinner, they retired to the parlor for coffee. The conversation flowed easily, with Meredith eager to hear about Elizabeth's life and Frankie's childhood in Montana. "And what about you, Mr. Faulkner?" Thomas asked during a lull in the conversation. "Frankie tells us you're the foreman at the Diamond F." Rylan nodded. "Yes, sir. For about a year now. Been with the ranch for 5 years total." "A respectable position," Thomas nodded approvingly. "Do you have family in the area?" "No, sir. My parents and siblings are back in Tennessee. Haven't seen them in about 10 years now, though we exchange letters at Christmas." "That must be difficult," Meredith said sympathetically. Rylan shrugged. "You get used to it. The West isn't a place for everyone. My father never understood why I wanted to leave the farm, but it wasn't the life for me." "And what is the life for you, Rylan?" Frankie asked softly. He met her gaze, struck by the genuine interest in her eyes. "I suppose I'm still figuring that out. For now, it's open skies, good horses, and honest work. Someday, as I mentioned, I hope to have my own land." "A worthy ambition," Thomas approved. The evening wore on pleasantly, but eventually, Rylan noticed Frankie stifling a yawn. Despite her improved condition, she was still recovering from her ordeal. "I should be heading back to the hotel," he said, rising. "Miss Blackburn needs her rest, and I need to get an early start back to the ranch tomorrow." There were immediate protests from the Blackburns, who insisted he stay in their guest room for the night. "It's the least we can do," Meredith insisted, "and it's already so late." Rylan hesitated, but a glance at Frankie decided him. She looked like she wanted him to stay, though she said nothing. "Thank you. That's very kind." As Thomas showed Rylan to the guest room upstairs, Meredith guided Frankie to the room that had been prepared for her. Rylan caught one last glimpse of Frankie as she ascended the stairs, her blue eyes finding his over her shoulder, a small smile playing at her lips. "Thank you again," she said softly, "for everything." Rylan tipped his head in acknowledgement. "Sleep well, Frankie." In the guest room, Rylan removed his boots and stretched out on the comfortable bed, staring at the ceiling. The past 2 days had been unlike any others in his life. He had saved a woman from freezing to death, yes, but something else had happened too, something he wasn't quite ready to name. Morning came with the soft sound of movement in the house below. Rylan dressed quickly and made his way downstairs to find Thomas already at the breakfast table, reading a newspaper. "Ah, good morning, Mr. Faulkner," the older man greeted him. "I trust you slept well." "Very well, thank you," Rylan replied, accepting the cup of coffee that Meredith offered as she entered from the kitchen. "Is Miss Blackburn still resting? She's just getting dressed," Meredith said with a knowing smile that made Rylan feel suddenly transparent. "She was quite insistent on being up to see you off." True to Meredith's word, Frankie appeared a few minutes later, dressed in another borrowed gown. She looked remarkably recovered, though there was still a hint of shadow beneath her eyes. "Good morning," she said, her smile warming when she saw Rylan. "I was afraid you might leave without saying goodbye." "I wouldn't do that," Rylan assured her, rising politely as she took her seat at the table. Breakfast was a hearty affair, with eggs, bacon, and fresh biscuits. Rylan ate appreciatively, knowing it would be a long ride back to the Diamond F. Throughout the meal, he was acutely aware of Frankie's presence across the table, of the way her eyes occasionally sought his, of the soft curve of her smile. All too soon, it was time for him to depart. He thanked the Blackburns for their hospitality and gathered his few belongings. "I'll walk you to the livery," Frankie offered, and before her aunt could protest, she added, "I need the fresh air and it's just down the street." Outside, the morning was bright and clear, the snow glittering in the sunlight. They walked side by side, their breaths forming clouds in the cold air. "Your aunt and uncle seem like good people," Rylan commented. Frankie nodded. "They are. It's strange I've only just met them, but I already feel like I belong here, like this is where I was meant to end up." "I'm glad," Rylan said sincerely. "Everyone deserves a place like that." They reached the livery stable where Thunder was waiting, freshly groomed and fed. Rylan checked his saddle and bags, then turned to face Frankie. "Well, Miss Blackburn, it seems this is where our paths diverge." Frankie looked up at him, her blue eyes serious. "Will I see you again, Rylan?" The question caught him off guard, though it shouldn't have. He had been wondering the same thing. "I reckon you might. I come into town for supplies every couple of weeks." "I'd like that," she said simply. "I owe you my life, after all." Rylan shook his head. "You don't owe me anything, Frankie. You saved yourself by making it to that shack. I just helped keep you warm." A hint of color touched her cheeks at his words. "Nevertheless, I hope you'll call on me when you're in town." "I will," he promised, suddenly certain that he would find every excuse to come to Clearwater in the coming weeks. There was a moment of awkward silence, neither quite knowing how to say goodbye. Finally, Rylan extended his hand. "Take care of yourself, Frankie." She placed her hand in his, but instead of shaking it, she stepped forward and stood on her tiptoes to place a soft kiss on his cheek. "You too, Cowboy." Rylan felt the imprint of her lips on his skin long after he had mounted Thunder and ridden out of Clearwater. The journey back to the Diamond F was uneventful, but his mind was filled with thoughts of blue eyes and a gentle smile. The next few weeks passed in a blur of routine ranch work. The snow gradually melted, and the first hints of spring appeared on the Wyoming landscape. Rylan found himself watching the calendar, counting the days until his next trip to town. When that day finally arrived, he took more care than usual with his appearance, shaving meticulously and wearing his best shirt. The other ranch hands noticed and teased him good-naturedly. "Got a sweetheart in town, Faulkner?" Hank Jensen, one of the older hands, asked with a knowing grin. "Just trying to look respectable," Rylan replied, though he couldn't quite meet the other man's eyes. "Uh-huh," Hank chuckled. "Well, you tell that respectability hello from all of us." Rylan rode into Clearwater with a mixture of anticipation and nervousness. He completed his errands at the general store first, where Thomas Blackburn greeted him warmly. "Miss Blackburn mentioned you might be coming to town today," Thomas said casually as he tallied Rylan's purchases. "She's helping Meredith at the church social this afternoon. I'm sure she'd be pleased to see you there." The church social was being held on the grounds adjacent to the small white church at the edge of town. By the time Rylan arrived, it was in full swing, with tables of food laid out and community members mingling in the spring sunshine. He spotted Frankie immediately. She was helping a group of children with a game of some sort, her laughter carrying across the grounds. She wore a blue dress that matched her eyes, and her hair was arranged in a simple but becoming style. She looked happy, at home. As if sensing his presence, she looked up, and her face brightened when she saw him. She said something to the children, then made her way over to where he stood. "Rylan," she greeted him warmly. "I was hoping you'd come." "Your uncle mentioned I might find you here," he explained, suddenly feeling awkward in the social setting. "You look well." "I am well," she confirmed. "And you, how's life at the Diamond F?" "Same as always. Cattle don't much care if it's winter or spring, they still need tending." Frankie laughed, the sound making something in Rylan's chest tighten pleasantly. "Come, let me introduce you to some people. And you must try Mrs. Peterson's apple pie, it's legendary in Clearwater." For the next hour, Rylan found himself drawn into the community gathering, meeting townsfolk and enjoying the homemade food. Frankie stayed by his side, introducing him as the man who saved my life, a description that made him uncomfortable with its heroism, but pleased him nonetheless. As the afternoon waned, they found themselves sitting on a bench beneath a budding tree, slightly apart from the main gathering. "You seem to have settled in well," Rylan observed. Frankie nodded, a content smile on her lips. "Better than I could have hoped. Aunt Meredith and Uncle Thomas have been wonderful. I've been helping at the store a few days a week, and I've started teaching piano to some of the local children." "Piano? I didn't know you played." "My mother insisted on lessons, even when money was tight. She said music brings beauty to life, no matter how hard that life might be." Rylan considered this. "Your mother sounds like a remarkable woman." "She was," Frankie agreed softly. "I think she would be happy to see me here." She turned to look at him directly. "And what about you, Rylan? Are you happy at the Diamond F?" The question gave him pause. Was he happy? The ranch provided steady work and fair pay. The men respected him, and Mr. Donovan treated him well. But sitting here with Frankie, he was suddenly aware of a longing for something more, something he hadn't fully acknowledged until now. "It's a good job," he said finally. "But I've been thinking more about that land of my own lately." Frankie's eyes brightened with interest. "Have you? Tell me about it, this dream of yours." And so he did, describing the piece of land he'd had his eye on for nearly a year now, a modest spread about 10 miles west of Clearwater, with a creek running through it and good grazing land. He talked about the house he would build, the stock he would raise, the life he imagined there. Frankie listened intently, asking questions and offering observations that showed she understood more about ranching than he would have expected. As he talked, Rylan realized that the picture in his mind had changed subtly. The house he imagined now had curtains at the windows and a woman's touch to the rooms. The future he envisioned was no longer solitary. "It sounds wonderful," Frankie said when he finally fell silent. "A dream worth pursuing." "I'm getting closer," he admitted. "Another year or so of saving, and I might have enough for the down payment on the land at least." Their conversation was interrupted by Meredith, who came to tell them the social was winding down and help was needed to pack up the tables. As they walked back to the Blackburn house later that evening, Frankie asked, "Will you stay for supper? Aunt Meredith would love to have you." Rylan hesitated. He should start back to the ranch before it got too late, but the thought of a few more hours in Frankie's company was too tempting to resist. "I'd be honored," he said. That evening set the pattern for the weeks that followed. Rylan found reasons to ride into Clearwater more frequently than strictly necessary for ranch business. Each time, he called at the Blackburn house, where he was always welcomed warmly. Sometimes he and Frankie walked through town together, or sat in the parlor talking while Meredith pretended not to watch them with approving eyes. Spring blossomed into summer. Rylan's feelings for Frankie grew stronger with each visit, though he had yet to speak of them directly. He sensed that she returned his interest, but propriety and a certain shyness on both their parts kept their relationship in the realm of friendship, albeit a friendship charged with an unspoken attraction. It was during a midsummer visit that things finally changed. Rylan had ridden into town specifically to see Frankie, having completed all necessary ranch errands the week before. He found her at the general store, helping Thomas with inventory. "Rylan," she exclaimed when she saw him, her face lighting up in a way that made his heart race. "What a lovely surprise." Thomas looked between them with knowing eyes. "Francesca, why don't you take the rest of the afternoon off? It's too fine a day to be cooped up indoors." Frankie didn't need to be told twice. She removed her apron, smoothed her skirt, and joined Rylan at the door. "Where to?" she asked, her blue eyes sparkling with anticipation. "I thought we might ride out to Willow Creek," Rylan suggested. "If you're up for it, I've brought a second horse." The second horse was a gentle mare borrowed from the Diamond F. Rylan had arranged it with Mr. Donovan the day before, explaining somewhat awkwardly that he wanted to show Miss Blackburn the countryside. "About time," the ranch owner had said with a knowing smile. "That girl's had you tied in knots since you found her in that blizzard." Now, as they rode side by side through the summer landscape, Rylan felt a sense of rightness that confirmed Mr. Donovan's observation. Frankie rode well, another skill acquired in her Montana childhood. Her hair gleamed in the sunlight, and her laughter carried on the warm breeze. Willow Creek was a peaceful spot about 3 miles from town, where the stream widened into a small pool before continuing its journey. Weeping willows lined the banks, providing shade and privacy. Rylan had packed a simple picnic, which they spread on a blanket beneath one of the larger trees. "It's beautiful here," Frankie said, looking around appreciatively. "How did you find it?" "One of the other hands mentioned it," Rylan explained. "I've been meaning to show it to you for a while now." They ate and talked, the conversation flowing easily between them as always. Afterward, they walked along the creek bank, stopping occasionally to watch the water flow over the smooth stones. "Rylan," Frankie said suddenly, turning to face him, "there's something I've been wanting to tell you." Her serious tone made him tense slightly. "What is it?" She took a deep breath. "I've been offered a position teaching at the school in Clearwater, starting this fall." Relief washed through him. "Frankie, that's wonderful news. It means I'll be staying in Clearwater permanently," she continued, watching his face carefully. "I know we've never really discussed what happens next, between us, I mean." Ryland's heart hammered in his chest. This was the opening he had been waiting for, hoping for. "I've been thinking about that a lot lately," he admitted. "About us." "Have you?" Her voice was soft, her eyes never leaving his face. "Yes." Ryland took a step closer to her. "Frankie, from the moment I found you in that lined shack, something changed for me. I didn't realize it at first, but now I know meeting you was the best thing that ever happened to me." A smile bloomed on her face, radiant and hopeful. "It was for me too, Rylan. Even though the circumstances were rather dire." He laughed softly, reaching out to take her hands in his. "I've never been good with words, Frankie, but I need you to know that I care for you, deeply. More than I've ever cared for anyone." "I care for you too," she whispered, her fingers tightening around his. "So very much." The world seemed to narrow to just the two of them, standing beneath the willow tree with the creek flowing gently beside them. Rylan raised one hand to touch her cheek, marveling at the softness of her skin. "Francisca Blackburn," he said softly, "may I kiss you?" Her answer was to rise up on her toes and press her lips to his in a kiss that started gentle, but quickly deepened with all the feelings they had kept contained for so long. Ryland's arms went around her waist, drawing her closer, while her hands moved to his shoulders, then his neck, her fingers tangling in his hair. When they finally pulled apart, they were both breathless. Frankie's cheeks were flushed, her eyes bright. "I've been wanting to do that for months," she admitted with a small laugh. "Me too," Ryland confessed, his hands still resting at her waist. "Every time I saw you." They stayed by the creek until late afternoon, talking and planning, sharing more kisses, and building the foundation for a future together. By the time they rowed back to Clearwater, the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. At the Blackburn house, Ryland formally asked Thomas for permission to court Frankie, a request that was granted with obvious pleasure. "You've had my blessing since the day you brought her to our door, Mr. Faulkner," Thomas said, shaking Ryland's hand firmly. "A man who would brave a blizzard to save a stranger is a man of character." Meredith embraced Frankie, tears of happiness in her eyes. "Your mother would be so pleased, my dear, so very pleased." The following months were the happiest of Ryland's life. He continued his work at the Diamond F while courting Frankie properly. They attended church socials together, went on picnics, and spent evenings in the Blackburn parlor, planning their future. Frankie began her teaching position at the school and quickly became beloved by her young students. By late autumn, Rylan had saved enough money to make an offer on the land he had his eye on. The owner, an elderly rancher looking to retire to California, accepted, and Rylan became the proud owner of 200 acres of good Wyoming land. The day the papers were signed, he rode straight to Clearwater, bursting with the news. He found Frankie at the schoolhouse just dismissing her students for the day. "Rylan," she exclaimed, surprised to see him in the middle of the week, "is everything all right?" "Everything is perfect," he assured her, waiting until the last child had departed before taking her hands in his. "I bought the land, Frankie. It's mine, ours if you want it to be." Her eyes widened, filling with joyful tears. "Oh, Rylan, you did it." "I did," he confirmed, unable to contain his smile. And now there's just one more thing I need to do to make it complete." Before she could ask what he meant, Rylan dropped to one knee, still holding her hands in his. "Francisca Blackburn, I love you with all my heart. You're the strongest, most beautiful woman I've ever known, and I can't imagine my life without you. Will you marry me?" Frankie's answer was immediate and emphatic. "Yes, yes, of course I will." Rylan stood and pulled her into his arms, lifting her off her feet in his exuberance. When he set her down, he reached into his pocket and produced a simple gold band. "It's not fancy," he apologized, "but it was my grandmother's. She gave it to me before I left Tennessee, told me to give it to the woman I couldn't live without." "It's perfect," Frankie assured him, her eyes shining as he slipped the ring onto her finger. "Absolutely perfect." They were married on a crisp December day, exactly 1 year after Rylan had found Frankie in the line shack. The ceremony was held in the Clearwater Church, with the entire town turning out to witness the union of their beloved schoolteacher and the foreman from the Diamond F. Meredith and Thomas hosted the reception at their home, which was decorated with evergreens and red ribbons for both the wedding and the approaching Christmas holiday. Mr. Donovan and several of the ranch hands attended, along with Frankie's students and their families. "Never seen you look so happy, Faulkner," Hank commented, slapping Rylan on the back during the festivities. "That girl's done wonders for you." Rylan couldn't disagree. As he watched Frankie move among their guests, radiant in her white gown, he felt a contentment he had never known before. She caught his eye across the room and smiled, a private smile meant only for him. Later, as they prepared to depart for their new home, Frankie hugged Meredith tightly. "Thank you for everything," she whispered, "for giving me a home when I had none." "You always have a home with us," Meredith assured her. "But now you're making a new one with a good man who loves you. I couldn't be happier for you, my dear." Their new home was simple, a small cabin Rylan had built on their land during the autumn months, with help from some of the Diamond F hands. It was basic but solid, with a stone fireplace, 2 rooms and windows that looked out over the rolling hills of their property. "It's not much yet," Rylan said as he carried Frankie over the threshold that evening, "but we'll build it together over time." Frankie looked around at the simple furnishings, the fire crackling in the grate, the curtains she had sewn herself hanging at the windows. "It's perfect," she said softly. "It's ours." That night, as they lay together in their new bed, the winter wind howling outside much as it had the night they met, Rylan held Frankie close and marveled at the journey that had brought them to this moment. "Do you ever think about how different things would be if you hadn't found that line shack?" he asked, his fingers tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. Frankie propped herself up on one elbow to look at him in the dim light. "Or if you hadn't decided to check the fence line that day?" "Yes, I think about it often." She leaned down to kiss him softly. "But I prefer to think that somehow we would have found each other anyway, that we were meant to be together, and the universe simply conspired to make it happen a little sooner." Rylan smiled, pulling her down for another kiss. "I like that idea, that no matter what, we would have found our way to each other. Just like we found our way home," Frankie murmured against his lips. The years that followed were filled with hard work and joy in equal measure. Rylan and Frankie built their ranch from the ground up, expanding the cabin into a proper house as their needs grew. Frankie continued to teach at the Clearwater School until their first child, a son they named Thomas after her uncle, was born 2 years after their marriage. A daughter, Elizabeth, named for Frankie's mother, followed 2 years later. The children grew strong and healthy in the clear Wyoming air, learning the ways of the ranch from their father and the joy of books and music from their mother. By the time Thomas was 7 and Elizabeth 5, the Faulkner Ranch had become one of the most prosperous in the area. Rylan had a knack for breeding good stock, and his cattle brought top prices at market. Frankie kept the books and managed the household with the same efficiency she had once applied to her classroom. They never forgot how they had met. Each winter, when the first big blizzard of the season blew in, they would gather their children around the fireplace and tell them the story of how their mother had been found half frozen in an abandoned line shack, and how their father had started a fire and never left her side. "It's the most romantic story ever," Elizabeth would sigh, her blue eyes so like her mother's shining with delight. "It's a good reminder to always check line shacks during a storm," Thomas would add pragmatically, making his parents laugh. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Rylan took Frankie on a special trip. They left the children with Meredith and Thomas for a few days and rode out to the old line shack where they had first met. It was still standing, though weathered by the years, and Rylan had arranged for it to be cleaned and prepared for their visit. "It looks smaller than I remember," Frankie commented as they dismounted outside the familiar structure. "Everything seems bigger when you're half frozen to death," Rylan teased, earning a playful swat from his wife. Inside, the shack had been transformed. Fresh bedding covered the old bunk, flowers stood in a jar on the table, and supplies for a comfortable stay had been arranged neatly on the shelves. A fire was already burning in the stove, warming the small space. "How did you manage this?" Frankie asked, looking around in wonder. "I had some help from the hands," Rylan admitted. "They rode out yesterday to set everything up. They think I'm the most romantic boss they've ever had." Frankie laughed, wrapping her arms around his neck. "They're right about that." They spent 2 days at the line shack, reliving memories and making new ones. On the second night, as they lay together in the bunk, the wind whistling around the eaves much as it had that fateful night, Frankie turned to face her husband in the dim light of the fire. "Do you know what I was thinking that first night when I was slipping in and out of consciousness?" she asked softly. Rylan shook his head. "What?" "I thought you were an angel," she confessed. "I was sure I was dying and you had come to take me to heaven." She traced the lines of his face with gentle fingers. "And in a way, I was right. You did save me, and you did give me heaven right here on earth." Rylan caught her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm. "You saved me too, you know. I was just going through the motions before I met you. Living, but not really alive." "Look at us now," Frankie murmured, nestling closer to him. "A ranch, 2 beautiful children, a life better than anything I could have dreamed." "And it all started right here," Rylan said, glancing around the small shack that had changed the course of his life. "In the middle of the worst blizzard Wyoming had seen in years. I'd brave 100 blizzards if they all led me to you," Frankie said, her eyes shining in the firelight. "You'll never have to," Rylan promised, pulling her close. "I'm not going anywhere, not ever." They returned to their ranch and their children, to the life they had built together from that chance encounter in a storm. Over the years, their family and their ranch continued to prosper. Thomas grew up to take over the ranch operations, while Elizabeth, with her mother's love of learning, eventually became the schoolteacher in Clearwater, following in Frankie's footsteps. Rylan and Frankie grew old together, watching their children marry and have children of their own. They remained active in the community, respected and loved by all who knew them. The story of how they met became something of a legend in Clearwater, told and retold at gatherings and celebrations. In their later years, when their hair had turned silver and their steps had slowed, they would often sit on the porch of their ranch house, watching the sun set over the land they had nurtured together. Sometimes they would reminisce about the early days, about the blizzard that had brought them together, about the line shack where their story had begun. "Do you ever regret it?" Rylan asked her once as they sat hand in hand in the golden evening light. Coming west, all the hardships you faced. Frankie's blue eyes, still bright despite the years, met his with the same love they had always held. Not for a single moment, she answered without hesitation. Every step I took led me to you, and that makes every hardship worthwhile. And Rylan, looking at the woman who had been the center of his world for over 4 decades, knew with absolute certainty that he would do it all again, ride out in that blizzard, find her half frozen in that abandoned line shack, start that fire, and never leave her side. For in saving her, he had saved himself, and in the warmth of their love they had both found home.